All stories published by Epic Yarn are fictional works intended for mature audiences. These narratives are submitted by a diverse community of contributors and subscribers created solely for entertainment and storytelling purposes. They do not represent real events or individuals, and no claims of factual accuracy are made. Additionally, all accompanying images are generated using AI technology to visually enhance the fictional experience.
Chapter 1: Daylight and Distance. The island looked different in the light of not needing to survive. The fire was no longer for warmth or food. It burned low now, more ceremonial than necessary. The shelters still stood, half-woven and rain-patched, but no one hid under them anymore. Everyone moved slower, more distracted, like they were already mentally elsewhere. But Frankie felt pinned to the sand, tethered to the heat in his chest that hadn't cooled since that night. Since Christian. He hadn't touched him since. They'd woken apart, breathless and sticky and quiet. The air between them stretched thin like the fabric of their briefs drying on a stick. Christian hadn't said a word when he got up, just reached for his clothes and slipped into the trees with the same silence he always carried. Frankie lay there for a long time, skin still humming, replaying every second. Christian's body above his mouth on Frankie's throat, his whispered giver still echoing. Now, Christian barely looked at him. Frankie sat on a fallen log near the beach, fingers trailing over the rough wood of the signal raft they were still patching together. The salt air stuck to his skin. Emily and Isla were sorting gear a few yards away. Reuben was in the trees, foraging or sulking. He hadn't spoken to Frankie since yesterday's tension-filled glance. And Christian? He was 20 feet away, shirtless, sweat-slick, crouched near the rocks, cleaning fish with brutal efficiency. His back flexed with each movement, broad, controlled, goddamn breathtaking. Frankie's chest tightened every time Christian's eyes slid over him and then quickly looked away. It hurt, not just the distance, but the fact that something had shifted and Christian was trying to pretend it hadn't. Frankie stood, restless, moving toward the tree-line with no real goal but to breathe somewhere else. He needed space. He needed touch. He needed not to feel so hollow after something so full. Behind him, he heard footsteps, running from something. Reuben's voice. Low. Sharp. Frankie turned. Reuben stood with a bundle of branches in his arms, eyes narrowed, just slightly. Frankie shrugged. No, just needed air. Reuben's jaw worked. He looked past Frankie toward the beach, toward Christian. You two haven't said a word to each other since the night you disappeared into the trees, Reuben said. Frankie flinched. We didn't disappear. We were building shelter. Reuben stepped closer. Right? And your lips just ended up swollen from hammering logs. Frankie didn't answer. Reuben's mouth pressed into a thin, bitter line. I just hope he's not the kind to fucking freeze. That's not you, Frank. I don't think it was just that, Frankie said softly. I mean, I don't know what it is. But it wasn't just that. Reuben looked at him for a long second, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, curt, and turned back toward camp. Frankie watched him go, then looked over at Christian again. Their eyes met this time. Brief. Just a flash. But Frankie saw it, the burn still there beneath the calm. Christian's hand paused on the fish. His lips parted. Then he turned away. Frankie's chest ached like a bruise. The sun was climbing. The air was hot, but nothing felt more suffocating than the space between them. He walked toward the sea, not to cool off, to feel something, to wait for the moment Christian finally broke the silence. Chapter 2: Signal Fire. The driftwood snapped in Christian's hands with a clean crack, but it felt like something inside him breaking too. The morning had started with purpose. Emily had woken early, rallying everyone to focus. Today's the day, she said, hands on hips, eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. We finished the signal fire. Big. Smoky. We're getting off this fucking rock. The others murmured agreement. Isla and Jonas started dragging dried palm leaves to the ridge. Reuben moved with quiet anger, barely looking at Frankie. Christian kept his mouth shut and focused on what he could control, the fire. Not the way Frankie's back arched when he reached to tie branches. Not the way his green eyes caught light like they were made of salt and sun. Not the way Christian still remembered the sound he made, low, desperate, when he came beneath him 3 nights ago. He drove a sharp stick into the sand, grinding it into place beside the growing pile of brush. His hands were scraped raw, knuckles split. He welcomed the pain. It helped. Slightly. Behind him, voices. Laughter. Frankie. Christian didn't turn, but he felt it. The heat. The nearness. Frankie's energy hit him like a pulse. God, it's hot, Frankie said somewhere to his right, laughing lightly. Then came the rustle of fabric. Christian glanced over and froze. Frankie was pulling off his shirt, slow and careless, dragging it up over his head. His golden skin shone with sweat, his torso lean, abs tight, chest flushed with sun. The waistband of his briefs peaked above his cut-off shorts. He tossed the shirt aside, wiped the back of his neck with his forearm, and looked up, right at Christian, and held it for a long, heavy second. Christian's mouth went dry. He turned away too fast back to the pile. His stomach tightened. His briefs, still damp under his shorts, clung uncomfortably to his skin. He hated this. He hated how badly he wanted to walk over, pin Frankie to the nearest palm tree, and kiss him like he had that night, slow, deep, letting his body say everything his mouth couldn't. But everyone was watching now. The group was tighter than ever, tension feeding off silence and heat. Christian crouched beside the pile again and began arranging branches, stacking them tight. Efficient. Perfect. Like control could undo the ache in his chest. He heard Frankie's footsteps behind him before he saw him. "Hey," Frankie said, voice low. Christian didn't look up. "Yeah. You okay?" A pause. Christian clenched his jaw. "Fine." Frankie's hand brushed his shoulder, just barely. Christian's body flinched. Frankie stepped back. "Right. Of course you are." Christian looked up finally, met those green eyes again. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world spun around them. Waves crashing, birds calling, but they were still. Then Emily shouted, "It's ready. We're lighting it." The group cheered. Frankie turned and jogged away. Christian stayed crouched in the sand, heart thudding, mouth full of everything he hadn't said. Chapter 3. Jealousy and Truth. Reuben found him by the tide pools, crouched low with his camera in hand, though Frankie hadn't taken a single shot. He knew Reuben was behind him before the first word came. He could feel it, that heat, that slow storm of energy that said something was coming. "You kissed him." Frankie looked up. "You want to just open with that?" Reuben crossed his arms, standing over him, salt-dried curls wild around his face. "Don't act surprised." Frankie exhaled, set the camera down gently beside him. "Okay." Reuben's eyes narrowed. "Okay. Yeah," Frankie said. "We kissed. We more than kissed. You know what it is? Silence. Just the wind and the water hissing in the cracks between stones." Reuben stepped closer. "You could have told me." Frankie stood slowly, brushing sand from his thighs. "You mean before or after you watched him avoid me, for 2 days like none of it happened?" "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Reuben looked down, jaw tight. His voice dropped. "We had a thing." Frankie blinked. "In college. And maybe something more if you'd ever stop pretending it didn't mean anything." "That's not fair." "You're right. It's not." Reuben's voice cracked. "Because I didn't come to this island hoping to watch you fall for someone else." Frankie stared at him, chest tight. "I didn't mean to. I didn't expect any of this." Reuben let out a laugh. It was bitter and short. "No one expects it, Frankie. That's what makes it real." The words hung between them, too sharp to touch. Frankie looked away, eyes on the horizon. "It wasn't just sex." Reuben went still. "I thought it would be," Frankie admitted. "I thought it was just heat and desperation and being stranded with someone built like a damn god. But it's not. Or it wasn't. At least not for me." Reuben stepped back, hands on his hips, head tilted to the sky like he was trying not to cry or scream or both. "I'm sorry," Frankie said. Reuben nodded once. "You always are." Then he turned and walked back toward camp, sand kicking up behind him. Frankie stood there alone, the tide rising near his ankles, the sea creeping in like a secret. He didn't know if Christian felt the same. He didn't even know if Christian would speak to him again. But the truth was out now, and sometimes that was enough to shake something loose. Chapter 4. The Rescue. The sound came first, low, mechanical, unnatural. Christian froze mid-step, machete still in hand, the jungle quiet around him except for that growing, pounding thrum. Then he heard Emily scream, "Helicopter!" He dropped the blade and ran. By the time he burst through the tree line, everyone was already on the beach. Frankie was pointing toward the sky, shirtless, hair wild, his voice hoarse from shouting. The others were waving frantically, shirts, leaves, whatever they could grab, jumping, laughing, crying. Christian looked up. It was real. A gray chopper slicing through the clouds, growing larger with every second. Not a dream, not a hallucination. Salvation, loud and blinding. He didn't move. His feet were planted in the sand as the wind whipped around them, sending the fire's smoke into chaos. The machine hovered, roaring, and then began to descend, slow and sure, toward the open stretch of beach they'd cleared for the signal. Hands grabbed him, Reuben and Jonas pulling him forward, yelling at him to get clear of the blades. Christian stumbled, but his eyes weren't on the helicopter. They were on Frankie. Frankie stood by the signal fire, chest heaving, eyes scanning, and then they met his. A second. 1 second. That was all it took. Frankie's mouth parted. His green eyes burned. There was no smile, no joy, not even relief. Just don't forget this. The rotor wash kicked up sand and smoke. Everyone ducked. Someone was crying. Isla, maybe? Reuben was already rushing forward, waving his arms at the rescue team emerging from the side door. Christian didn't look away. Frankie took 1 step toward him, then stopped. And that was it. The helicopter ride was cold and loud, the kind of noise that rattled the bones and silenced thought. Christian sat wedged between strangers and survivors, wrapped in a scratchy blanket, eyes locked on the floor. Frankie was 2 rows ahead. He didn't turn around. Neither of them spoke the whole flight. Christian stared at the back of Frankie's head and felt every mile they flew like a thread snapping between them. When they landed, the world rushed in fast. Emergency crews, cameras, lights, noise. People were crying. People were shouting. Everything blurred. Frankie was swept away in the crowd before Christian could even reach him. Just one last glance. Green eyes wide and lost. Then gone. Christian stood alone in a white tent, wrapped in a blanket that didn't smell like salt or smoke or sweat. A nurse checked his pulse. Another man asked questions. He answered them all without thinking. Name, country, next of kin. But inside, all he could think was this. He didn't say goodbye, and Christian hadn't stopped him. Chapter 5. Separate Roads. Los Angeles was too loud. Frankie stood in the middle of his apartment, barefoot, freshly showered, wrapped in a towel, staring at the framed surf print on his wall like he didn't recognize it. The light outside was gold and artificial. Nothing smelled like sea salt or wood smoke. The AC hummed. The fridge buzzed. A car honked 3 floors down. He felt like a ghost in his own life. The rescue had blurred into headlines, statements, and reunion interviews he didn't want to give. His social media blew up, followers hungry for survival stories, trauma, behind-the-scenes footage. He posted 1 photo, just a shot of the island sky through palm leaves. Then he shut his phone off. He hadn't heard from Christian. Not a call, not a message, not even a follow. Reuben had texted once, "Glad you're home safe." Nothing more. No mention of what they'd said. What Frankie had admitted. Frankie hadn't responded. He'd landed in LA 2 days ago and hadn't unpacked. His suitcase sat open, clothes still damp with the smell of ocean and sweat. He kept touching things, his bed, the faucet, the edges of his shelves, just to feel grounded. But it was all wrong. What made it worse wasn't the silence. It was the memory of Christian's eyes before the helicopter blades took him. That look, like goodbye, was a wound neither of them had the tools to clean. Meanwhile, in Lyon, Christian stood in his father's studio, running his fingers over an unfinished sculpture. Oak, smooth under his palm. His family had welcomed him back with tears and too many questions. They made him soup, washed his clothes, left him alone when he needed it. Mostly. But Christian couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Frankie, shirtless in the sun, lips parted, eyes burning. Frankie's voice calling his name just before everything changed. They hadn't spoken since the island. He didn't know why he hadn't messaged first. Pride? Fear? The ache in his chest that said if he reached out and Frankie didn't answer, it might break him completely? He turned from his sculpture, jaw clenched, and crossed the studio to his desk. There in a box sat a small piece of driftwood, palm-sized, smooth from the sea. He picked it up, sat down, and slowly began carving. Not with a plan, just instinct. A shape, a name, something to send when he was ready. Across the ocean, Frankie lay in his bed in the dark, one hand resting on his chest, the other curled against the empty pillow beside him. He whispered Christian's name once, just to hear it aloud. It didn't help. He closed his eyes. Sleep didn't come. Chapter 6, Reentry. Frankie sat on the floor of his living room, surrounded by 3 unopened PR packages, a ring light, and a camera he hadn't touched in weeks. The sunset outside was golden and obscene, too pretty for the way his chest felt. He aimed the camera at his face. Just to try, just to see. "Hey guys," he said softly. The sound of his own voice made him wince. He looked into the lens, into the version of himself he used to slip into so easily. Frankie, the creator, the traveler, the storyteller. The man who made his life into something beautiful and shareable. Now, he couldn't even fake a caption. He switched off the camera, pulled his legs in, rested his forehead on his knees. The island had taken things from him, comfort, privacy, Reuben in a way. But it had also given him something he couldn't unfeel. The weight of Christian's body, the rasp of his voice, low in the dark. The look in his eyes when he said nothing at all but meant everything. And now he was gone. No word, no text, no proof any of it had happened except the ache in Frankie's ribs. He stood, pacing restlessly to his desk. His apartment was too neat, too curated. Nothing smelled like fire. Nothing felt like him. He sat down, opened the drawer on the right, pulled out the only object that didn't belong to California, a small, carved piece of driftwood. Christian had made it before the rescue. Frankie had found it in his pack after the flight, wrapped in a cloth. It was simple, just a smooth piece of pale wood, sanded soft, initials scratched into the grain. FB, his. Frankie turned it over in his hand, fingers running along the edges. He pressed it to his chest, lips parted like maybe it could still carry heat. He closed his eyes, inhaled. Then, slowly, he turned on his phone for the first time in 4 days. It buzzed with messages, DMs, missed calls, and 3 texts from Emily. He ignored them all and opened a blank note. "I miss you." He stared at it, deleted it, typed again. "Do you still think about the island?" Deleted that too. He set the phone down, picked up the driftwood again, pressed his forehead to it, like a prayer he didn't know the words to. Say something, he thought. Please. And then, like the universe heard him, his phone buzzed. One notification. Unknown number. "Are you safe?" His heart stopped. He opened it. Christian. His hands shook as he typed back. "Frankie, I am now." Chapter 7. Ghost Messages. Frankie. It started with just those 3 words. "Are you safe?" And it should have felt simple. Basic. But Frankie stared at that message like it was oxygen. Like someone had just cracked open the surface of the ocean and he could finally breathe again. His fingers hovered over the screen, then moved. "Frankie, I am now." There was a pause, 20 minutes. Enough time for him to go stand in the shower, lean his forehead against the tile, and ask himself, what the hell are we doing? When he checked again, another message had arrived. "Christian, I think about you every night." Frankie sat down on the bathroom floor, still wet, towel falling off his hips. His hands shook. He typed, paused, deleted, typed again. "Frankie, do you miss me or the island?" The reply came quicker. "Christian, you." That was the start. Christian. He wasn't sure what made him do it. He'd sat at his workbench in Lyon for hours, turning the tiny carving in his hand. He made dozens now, bowls, masks, spoons, scraps of wood with initials and curves and fire-scorched edges. But none of them felt finished. None of them felt like that night. He looked at the photo beside him. Frankie, laughing shirtless in the jungle light, hair wild, hand blurry in motion. A secret shot Christian had taken with a borrowed phone the day before the rescue. He hadn't meant to keep it. He hadn't meant to look at it every day. But he did. And tonight, when the sky turned violet and the cicadas sang outside the studio, Christian whispered, "Fuck it. Open WhatsApp and type, 'Are you safe?'" Now, days later, it had become something like a ritual. Short messages at first, then longer, then voice notes. He didn't dare call. Neither did Frankie. But he'd lie in bed, shirtless, the phone beside him, and press play on a message. Frankie's voice. "I can't look at the ocean the same way anymore." Frankie's voice. "Do you remember how your hand fell on my chest?" "I do." Frankie's voice. "I want to know what your bed smells like." Christian would close his eyes. Press record. His voice. "My bed smells like cedar." "And you?" His voice. "Sometimes I wake up hard and sweating, and I say your name out loud." Once my neighbor heard me. She asked who Frankie was. I told her I didn't know. He didn't say everything, but he said more than he ever had before. Frankie. He sent the photo first. One he'd taken that morning, just the ocean from his apartment window. Light bending on the waves. No filter. No caption. Just the view. Christian replied an hour later. Photo. A small wooden carving. It was Frankie's name in tiny smooth letters. Beneath it, a pair of crossed palms. The island. Them. Frankie's heart clenched. He pressed his thumb to the image like he could feel the grain of the wood through glass. Then he typed, "Frankie, do you want me to come to you?" The typing bubble appeared, then vanished, then again, then a reply. "Christian, yes. Please." Chapter 8. Reunion. Frankie stood in the arrivals terminal at Lyon, Saint-Exupéry, heart hammering hard enough to bruise his ribs. He hadn't slept on the flight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Christian, shirtless, lit by firelight, or crouched over driftwood, or walking away across a hot beach without saying goodbye. Now, none of that mattered. He was here, backpack slung over one shoulder. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair a mess, and his chest felt too full of everything he'd swallowed since that last kiss on the island. And still, somehow he was smiling. A small, nervous smile. The kind that comes when you're about to see someone you haven't touched in a month, but thought about every night. The text had been simple. "Christian, I'll meet you outside. East exit. Black jacket." Frankie found the door, walked through it, and there he was. Tall, calm, still, wearing a black jacket over a white t-shirt, jeans that fit too well, and that quiet heat in his eyes Frankie had missed more than he could explain. Christian didn't move at first. Neither of them did. Just stared, like maybe the wrong word would shatter the whole thing. Then Frankie dropped his bag and walked straight into him, hands grabbing the edges of Christian's jacket, mouth already parting. Christian caught him with both arms, pulled him close with a low sound in his throat that made Frankie's knees weak. Their lips met like they never wanted to be apart again. No testing, no question, just mouths crushed together, hands gripping hard, breath caught between them. Frankie kissed him like hunger, like apology, like the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask. Christian kissed back with everything he'd held in, slow at first, then deeper, tongue sliding into Frankie's mouth, one hand cupping the back of his head. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads rested together. "I missed you," Frankie whispered, breathless. Christian's voice was hoarse. "I don't think I ever stopped." Frankie let out a soft laugh. "This is real, right? You're here. I'm not dreaming this." Christian leaned in, lips brushing his jaw, then the corner of his mouth. "Not unless I'm dreaming too." They stood there on the sidewalk, people moving around them like a tide, but they didn't care. The world was noise. This was the center of it. Christian stepped back just enough to grab Frankie's hand. "Come home with me." Frankie nodded. "Lead the way." That night, Lyon felt warmer. The streets smelled of old stone, fresh bread, wood smoke. But none of that mattered, because when the apartment door clicked shut and Christian turned to face him, eyes dark and hands already reaching, Frankie didn't wait. Chapter 9. First night. No walls. Christian stood in the doorway of his bedroom and watched Frankie undress in the lamplight. Slow, quiet, not teasing. Not this time. He pulled off his shirt like he was shedding something heavier. Then his jeans. Then socks. His body was still golden from the sun, lean and lithe, with small scars and freckles Christian had never noticed before. Frankie looked up. No smile. Just that soft, raw openness Christian had only seen once. On the island, right before they touched for the first time. Christian stepped forward. He reached out, brushing a thumb down Frankie's jaw. Are you sure? Frankie's hand slid around Christian's wrist, holding it there. Yeah, he whispered. I want all of you. Christian exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for weeks. They kissed again, but slower this time. Frankie's lips were warm, tasting of wine and nerves. No rush, just mouths meeting in rhythm. Just fingertips tracing along ribs and backs, and the curves of hips. Clothes fell away. They climbed onto the bed together, tangled in sheets that smelled like cedar and soap and something faintly earthy. Christian's scent, rich and steady. Frankie lay beneath him, green eyes wide, chest rising in shallow breaths. His hands trembled a little where they pressed against Christian's shoulders. Christian kissed his way down that body, careful, reverent. Each touch was its own sentence. Each sigh from Frankie, its own answer. By the time Christian was inside him, Frankie had gone still, eyes locked on his, mouth parted. And Christian moved slowly, every thrust deliberate, deep, like he was anchoring them to this moment, this room, this new version of each other. Frankie touched his face. Don't look away. I won't. Christian held him like something precious. He whispered things in French, words that didn't need translating. Promises without expectation. Truths too soft to speak aloud. When Frankie came, his hands gripped Christian's waist, his throat tight with a sound that broke into a sob. His whole body shook. Christian followed not long after, spilling with his face buried in Frankie's neck, holding him like the bed might fall away if he let go. After, they lay tangled, limbs still trembling, sweat drying between them. Frankie was the one who broke the silence. He turned onto his side, looked at Christian in the low light, and whispered, I love the way you touch me. Like I'm real. Christian kissed his forehead, then his cheek, then his lips. You are. Frankie pressed their foreheads together. Say my name. Christian's voice cracked as he did. Frankie. Frankie closed his eyes. A single tear slid down his cheek. No one said anything else. There was nothing left to prove. Only the sound of their breath, and the soft weight of being home in each other's arms at last. Chapter 10, Found. Christian. He hadn't planned the walk. It just happened. Fingers brushing Frankie's as they strolled through View Lyon, winding alleys lit by amber street lamps, cobblestones slick with rain that had passed an hour ago. Frankie had insisted on gelato despite the chill. Christian bought him pistachio. One taste and Frankie made a sound that made Christian's blood move too fast again. They didn't speak for a while. It didn't feel necessary. Christian watched Frankie walk beside him, camera slung over his shoulder, lips faintly sticky with sugar, cheeks still pink from earlier. When they kissed under the covers, hands slow, skin warm. I could stay here forever, Frankie said suddenly. Christian smiled. In Lyon? Frankie shrugged. I mean, here, with you. Christian stopped walking. Frankie turned to face him. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. Just full. Don't say that unless you mean it, Christian said. Frankie stepped closer, slipping a hand under Christian's jacket, resting it flat over his chest. I mean it. Christian's heart thudded against Frankie's palm. You want to live here? Christian asked. Frankie tilted his head. You want to move to California? Christian huffed a laugh. I could. I'd probably complain about the sun. I'd buy you sunglasses. Christian reached up, brushing hair from Frankie's face, letting his fingers linger on the sharp line of his jaw. I don't care where we live, he said quietly, as long as I don't have to miss you anymore. Frankie's eyes went glassy. Yeah, same. They stood in the middle of the street like the whole city belonged to them, and maybe in that moment it did. Frankie. 2 days later, they lay on Christian's studio floor, backs flat against a woven rug, surrounded by sketches and half-finished carvings. Frankie pointed up at a beam overhead. I want to hang one of your pieces there. Christian smirked. Which one? You pick. Christian rolled onto his side, propped on one elbow. You're really staying. Frankie nodded. For now. For how long? Frankie turned to look at him, green eyes calm. Until I want to leave. And what if I don't want you to? Frankie smiled. Then convince me to stay. Christian leaned in and kissed him, slow and deep. When he pulled back, Frankie looked dazed. Okay, he whispered. That's a good start. Later, Frankie pulled out his phone. Opened Instagram for the first time in weeks. Posted a photo. Not of the island. Not of the sky. Not of the sea. Just a close-up of hands. His and Christian's, fingers entwined, resting on a carved piece of wood. Caption, found. No hashtags. He set the phone down. Turned his head. Christian was watching him from the bed. One arm behind his head, mouth soft with affection. Frankie crawled in beside him. Pressed their bodies close. And when they finally fell asleep, bare skin touching, breath slow and easy, it wasn't survival anymore. It was living. Together.